Hey there, welcome to the Focus Podcast with Taralee. This is the place where we talk about real life, real relationships, and how to grow through it all. If you're looking for simple mindset shifts, better communication, and deeper connections, you're in the right spot. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Focus Podcast. I'm Taralee Eddington. Last week we talked about the invisible breaking points. Those 3 moments before your marriage hits crisis that you probably didn't even notice happening. And if you listened to that episode, you probably had one of those moments where everything clicked. You thought, oh my gosh, that's exactly what happened to us. I finally understand why we're here. So today I want to talk about what happens after you have that realization. Because here's what most couples do next. They try to fix it. And their attempts to fix it can make it worse. This is what I call the Reconnection Paradox. And if you've been trying to save your marriage and nothing is working, this episode might just explain why. So you finally understand your marriage broke because emotional safety disappeared, connection became work, and hope felt dangerous. And you're reading, you're learning, you're trying to understand the framework. And then you think, okay, I get it now. I need to rebuild that safety. I need to be more vulnerable. I need to try harder to connect. That sounds right, doesn't it? It makes logical sense. Safety is missing, so I need to fill that gap. I need to be brave and vulnerable and show my spouse that I'm willing to try. So you do it. You initiate a conversation. You lower your walls. You share something vulnerable. You tell your spouse something you've been scared to say. And they get defensive, or they get dismissive, or they use it against you later, and then you're more hurt than before. You think, I was trying, why didn't that work? And so then you don't try again. Those walls go back up, higher than before. And now you're even more convinced that this marriage is broken beyond repair. This is the Reconnection Paradox, and here's what's happening. You cannot rebuild emotional safety through vulnerability. You rebuild it through something called safety first repair. There's a critical difference, and I need you to understand this, because this difference explains why your DIY attempts may have been backfiring. I had a client, we'll call him Mike. He listened to the podcast about invisible breaking points, and he realized, oh, the problem is that my wife Sarah doesn't feel safe. I need to show her that I'm willing to be vulnerable. So one night he sat down with Sarah. They had some quiet time and the kids were in bed. And he said, I need to be honest with you about something. I've been feeling like I'm not good enough, like I'm failing you as a husband, and it really scares me. So that's really vulnerable, right? It's brave. But here's what happened. Sarah heard that, and instead of feeling closer to him, she thought, see, I was right. He doesn't think he's enough. And of course he's not being the husband that I need. And so then she said, you're right. You haven't been a good husband. You're always checked out. Mike's vulnerability just became evidence against him. His biggest fear was weaponized, and he swore that he would never be that vulnerable again. See, when emotional safety is missing, vulnerability isn't brave. It's dangerous. Because there's no agreement between you and how you'll treat each other when one of you is vulnerable. And without that agreement, vulnerability just gives your spouse more ammunition. And every time you're hurt while trying to be vulnerable, your nervous system learns that vulnerability isn't safe and that walls are necessary. So the walls go higher and the distance grows and you end up further apart than when you started. That's the Reconnection Paradox. You're trying to fix the marriage by doing the thing that feels most dangerous in an unsafe environment. So what's the solution? You can keep trying to do the same thing and hope for a different result, but we all know that that's the definition of insanity. You just need to do it in the right order. And this is where most couples, even couples in therapy, often get it wrong. The right order is phase 1, safety first. Before you can be vulnerable, you need an agreement about safety. This means sitting down and explicitly talking about the following things. When I'm vulnerable with you, how will you treat that vulnerability? What will you do if I share something that scares me or hurts? How will we protect each other? Now, this might sound clinical, like you're creating a contract with your marriage, but here's the thing. In crisis marriage, clinical is actually good because you need clarity. You need to know the rules of engagement before you engage. Let me give you an example. You might agree that when you share something vulnerable, I won't use it against you in a fight, and you won't either. If I'm struggling to respond with compassion, I'll say, I need a moment instead of reacting. And then we'll come back to it when I'm more regulated. That is safety. That's an agreement. Once that agreement exists, vulnerability becomes possible. Phase 2 is intentional connection. Only after safety is rebuilt can real connection begin. But, and this part is important, connection in a crisis marriage doesn't look like connection in a healthy marriage. It's not spontaneous. It's not effortless. It's not, we'll just feel close naturally. It's intentional. It's structured. It's small. For example, maybe you sit together for 10 minutes and answer 3 specific questions. Question 1, what's one way I've seen you try this week? Question 2, what's one thing that made you smile today? Question 3, what's one thing you appreciated about me recently, even if it was small? So nothing heavy, nothing that requires a deep vulnerability, but it's time together where you both feel safe. And if you do this repeatedly, 10 times, 50 times, 100 times, something shifts. You remember, oh yeah, being together can feel good. So phase 3 is deepening that vulnerability. Only after you've established safety and practiced connection can you be truly vulnerable again. And even then, it's gradual. Not, I'm going to tell you everything I've been holding in. More like, I'm going to tell you one thing that scares me, and I'm going to trust that you handle it with care based on the agreement that we made. And because you've practiced safety and connection, that trust is actually justified. Okay, so why does the order matter? Now, I really want to be clear about this because this order is not optional. You cannot skip phase 1 and go to phase 2 or 3 because phase 1 is the foundation that makes everything possible. It's like building a house. You can't put furniture in and paint on the walls if the foundation is cracked. The weight of the upper floors will just make the cracks bigger. You have to fix the foundation first. And the foundation of a marriage in crisis, does it feel safe? Okay, I want to tell you the rest of the story of Sarah and Mike because it gets better. After Mike's vulnerable attempt backfired, they came to me. And the first thing I did was say, okay, Mike, you were brave, but you did it at the wrong time. You tried to be vulnerable in an unsafe environment. And then I asked Sarah, can you see why that vulnerability felt threatening instead of connecting? And Sarah said, yes, it felt like confirmation of my worst fears. And then I said, so here's what we're going to do. And we rebuilt their marriage in phases. First, we established agreements about safety. We talked about how they would treat each other, what they would and wouldn't say, how they would pause before reacting. It wasn't romantic, it was practical, but it mattered. Then, once they had those agreements in place, we worked on intentional connection. Sarah and Mike would sit together for 15 minutes and answer prompts that I gave them. Nothing heavy, just connection. And then something shifted. Sarah started to feel safe again, and Mike started to feel like reconnection was possible. Then after they'd done this for several weeks, I said, okay, now you can try vulnerability again. And this time when Mike shared his fear, Sarah responded differently because the foundation was there, because they had an agreement, because she had practiced safety with him over and over. And she was ready to hear him without triggering her own fears. Now, I'm going to say something that might surprise you. You can't DIY this alone. Not because you're not smart, not because you're not trying hard enough, but because executing the right sequence requires someone to help you stay on track. Because here's what happens. You learn the sequence, you understand it, you think, okay, I can do this. And you start phase 1. You have a safety conversation. But then something triggers you. Your spouse says something defensively, and you forget all about the agreement. You react. The old pattern kicks in. And without someone to help you course correct, you think the whole thing is broken. Or you execute phase 1 perfectly, but you skip the explicit agreement part. You just try to be more understanding, and it doesn't stick. Or you do phases 1 and 2 beautifully, and so then you get hopeful that you think you're ready for phase 3, but you're not. You're still too raw, and the vulnerability is premature, and it backfires. And without someone to guide you, you quit. The couples who actually rebuild their marriages, they're not smarter or more in love. They're the ones who have a clear structure, a defined sequence, and someone to help them stay on track. If you've been trying to fix your marriage on your own and it's not working, here is what I want you to know. You are not failing, you're just in the wrong sequence. And you've been given wrong information about what a crisis marriage needs. Most people think, my marriage is broken, I need to communicate better, or I need to date my spouse, I need to try harder. But that's not what a crisis marriage needs. A crisis marriage needs 3 phases in order: safety first, connection second, vulnerability third. Do it in that order with the right support, and your marriage can come back to life. But skip phase 1 and jump to vulnerability, you're just going to create more hurt. So here's what I want you to do. If you've been trying and failing, or if you feel your reconnection attempts keep backfiring, or if you feel hopeless about your marriage's future, don't give up just yet. You don't have the wrong marriage, you just had the wrong sequence. And it can be fixed, but it needs to be fixed with the right support. I want you to book a consultation call with me where we'll talk about where you are in the phases and what's been holding you back. And we'll also talk about whether my marriage breakthrough program is the right fit. You can find that link in the show notes. And if you haven't listened to the episode on invisible breaking points yet, go back and listen to that one first, because this episode builds on it. So thank you for being here. I'll see you next week. Thanks for hanging out with me today on the Focus Podcast. If something stood out or helped you in some way, feel free to share it or leave a quick review. It means a lot. Keep showing up, keep growing, and I'll catch you in the next episode.